The second the alien prince's dragon sank its fangs into Rose's arm, everyone in the palace just held their breath. They were all waiting for her to die. In the rigid world of the Acheron Empire, a human maid even touching a sacred beast was an unforgivable crime. The punishment: immediate, agonizing dissolution. The glowing heat from the dragon's jaws should have turned her straight to dust. But what happened next silenced the entire palace. Because she didn't die. Instead, as the beast's teeth released her, a searing psychic bond ignited a forbidden three-way connection between the girl, the prince, and his dragon that wouldn't just threaten a royal dynasty, but shatter their entire civilization. The Acheron Empire was a monument to cosmic order, a civilization literally carved from starlight and marble. Its palaces were obsidian spires that seemed to drink the light of a binary sun, casting long sharp shadows over a society built on unshakable tradition. At the very top of this galactic dynasty sat the royal family. Each member was soul-bound to a sacred dragon, a living, breathing symbol of their divine right to rule. These magnificent beasts weren't pets, they were partners. Their minds and souls tangled up with their riders in a telepathic bond that gave the Acheron elite their power. Way below them, in the cavernous halls and hidden corridors, lived the humans, and they weren't citizens. They were imported labor, stuck in decades-long contracts to pay off interstellar travel debts they could never hope to afford. Their entire life was one of quiet servitude, driven by a single life-preserving rule: be invisible. To be noticed was to be scrutinized, and to be scrutinized was to risk punishment, deportation, or just disappearing. Humans were taught to walk with their eyes on the floor, to speak only when spoken to, and to clean the messes of their superiors without leaving a single trace. They were ever there. Rose was a master of this invisibility. For 3 years, she'd navigated the treacherous currents of the royal palace with a quiet resilience that was almost an art form. Every single day was a performance. She was a ghost in the machine, her movements silent and precise, her face a perfect mask of obedient emptiness. But underneath all that, a fire was burning. Every credit she earned was painstakingly saved. Tucked away for a future she barely let herself dream of, a future outside the palace walls, away from the suffocating grip of the Acheron Empire. She just wanted to escape, to go back to a world where she could look up at the sky without being afraid. This fragile existence was enforced by men like Master Greaves, the head steward. He was a man whose posture was as rigid as the laws he upheld, and whose eyes missed nothing. "You are here to serve, not to be seen," he would remind them, his voice a low hiss that promised terrible consequences. "The dragons are sacred. Their chambers are sacred. A single misstep, a single unauthorized touch, means you forfeit your life. Don't you forget it." At the center of this suffocating world was Prince Stellan, heir to the throne. He was as cold and distant as the void between stars, his golden eyes radiating the ancient authority of his bloodline. He moved through the palace with a chilling grace, a silent testament to his own power, and always near him, either physically or just as a looming presence in your mind, was Ash. The prince's dragon was a creature of breathtaking terror and beauty, with scales the color of cooling embers and so massive he blotted out the light. Their bond was legendary, a perfect, unbreakable union the whole empire revered. To the humans, they weren't a prince and his companion. They were a god and his angel of death, a constant, terrifying reminder of how insignificant they were. Rose, like everyone else, knew to make herself smaller, quieter, and faster whenever they drew near. Her survival literally depended on it. The assignment came on a day like any other, delivered by Master Greaves with his usual grim finality. The prince's sanctuary needed to be cleaned. A silent, collective wave of fear rippled through the maids. The sanctuary was the one place where Prince Stellan's dragon, Ash, often slept alone. It was the most dangerous job in the entire palace. Rose's name was called. She felt her blood run cold, but her face stayed perfectly placid. She just nodded, gathered her cleaning drones, and walked toward the gilded doors at the heart of the royal wing. She stepped into the sanctuary, with her heart hammering against her ribs. The air in here was different, heavy, ancient, and humming with a quiet power that made the hairs on her arms stand on end. The chamber was enormous, a testament to how much they revered the dragons. Intricately carved stone showed their history, and a gentle waterfall cascaded into a crystal-clear pool. And there, in the middle of the room, lay Ash. He was bigger than any story could ever tell, a living mountain of muscle and scale, his chest rising and falling in a slow, deep slumber. Wisps of shimmering smoke curled from his nostrils with every breath. Rose moved with painstaking slowness, every tiny action deliberate. She guided the silent, floating cleaning drones with practiced ease, her own feet making no sound on the polished floor. She was a ghost, her entire being focused on one single goal: finish the job and get out unnoticed. For an hour it worked. The chamber gleamed, the water was filtered. She was almost done, relief so close she could taste it. She reached for a fallen leaf near the base of a statue, her mind already picturing the safety of the servants' corridors. And then came the mistake. A simple, human error, a moment of distraction. Her hand brushed against a loose stone on the statue's base. It was no bigger than her thumb, but when it hit the marble floor, The tiny clatter sounded like a thunderclap in the echoing silence. Ash's head snapped up. His massive neck uncoiled with terrifying speed, and his eyes like molten gold locked right onto her. They weren't the cold eyes of a beast. They were intelligent, ancient, and filled with a sudden, startled fury. A low growl rumbled from deep in his chest, a sound that vibrated through the floor and into her bones. She froze, hands still outstretched, her body paralyzed by a primal fear she'd never known. The rule, the one absolute law of her life, screamed in her head, "Do not be seen." But she had been seen. The dragon lunged. It wasn't the full-on incinerating attack she expected. It was swift and precise. His enormous head darted forward, and his jaws closed around her forearm. She cried out, a sharp, choked sound of pain and terror. White-hot agony flared up her arm as his fangs, each as long as a dagger, pierced her flesh. A strange, glowing heat, the color of a blue star, pulsed from the wound, flooding her veins. This was it. The dissolution. This was the end. The guards at the doors, drawn by her scream, could only stare in horror, expecting to see a human maid unmade by sacred dragonfire. Rose's knees buckled. As she collapsed, her last conscious thought wasn't of the pain, but of the crushing, soul-deep failure. She had broken the one rule that mattered, but the end didn't come. The fire in her veins didn't dissolve her. Instead, as Rose lay crumpled on the floor, the world fading to black, something impossible happened. The immense pressure on her arm vanished. Ash had let her go, but he didn't pull back. He didn't finish the job. Instead, the great dragon lowered his massive head and nudged her gently. It was a gesture so completely at odds with the violence of the bite that it defied all logic. A soft, crooning sound rumbled in his throat, a sound of distress, of concern. Then, to the absolute shock of the petrified guards, Ash curled his colossal body around Rose's small, still form, shielding her from view. His tail swept around to complete the circle, creating a fortress of scales. A low growl, deeper and more menacing than before, was aimed right at the doorway. The warning was unmistakable. "Stay back, she's mine." Just as the guards started stammering into their communicators, Prince Stellan strode into the chamber. He moved with the urgency of a stormfront, his face a mask of cold fury. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded, his eyes immediately taking in the catastrophe. His sacred dragon, coiled around a fallen human. He saw the blood, the tattered sleeve of her uniform, and his fury sharpened. This human had somehow provoked his beast, defiled his sanctuary. Her life was over. But as he got closer, he just stopped. His perfect, regal composure fractured. He felt it, a faint alien echo in the back of his own mind. It wasn't just the familiar, comforting presence of Ash. There was a third person in there, a tiny, flickering flame of thought and feeling that didn't belong. It was terrified, overwhelmed, and in terrible pain. It was human. He looked from his dragon's protective stance to the girl lying inside his coils, and a horrifying understanding began to dawn. Master Greaves arrived with more guards, his face pale with a mix of terror and outrage. "Your Highness, we will remove the contamination immediately," he stammered, motioning for his men to advance. "No," Stellan commanded. His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the tension with absolute authority, freezing everyone. He took another step forward, his golden eyes locked on the scene. "Don't touch her." He knelt down cautiously, extending a hand not to Rose, but to his dragon's snout. Ash allowed it, whining softly, the sound a strange mix of apology and defiance. And through that touch, the psychic feedback loop slammed into Stellan with its full, undeniable force. He felt Ash's swirling confusion and deep, instinctual protectiveness. And woven into it all, he felt the fragile, stubborn spark of the human girl's life, a life that was now impossibly, horrifically, tangled with his own. Healers were summoned. Arriving in a flurry of hushed panic, they approached the scene like it was a bomb about to go off. Under the prince's unblinking gaze, they ran their scanners over Rose. The readings made no sense. She wasn't dying. Her cells were stable. The dragon's venom, a substance that should have burned her up from the inside out, was integrating with her. It was rewriting her, changing her, but it wasn't killing her. They looked at each other, then at the prince, their faces full of a terror that went far beyond a broken rule. This was a violation of the natural order. This was magic so old it was supposed to be a myth, and it was happening right in front of them. Rose woke up to the smell of sterile air and the feeling of impossibly soft sheets. Confusion was a thick fog in her mind. She definitely wasn't in her tiny bunk in the servants' quarters. She was in a vast, opulent room, lying in a bed that felt like a cloud. This was a medical suite reserved for Acheron royalty. Panic tried to claw its way up her throat, but it was immediately smothered by a strange new feeling. It was a warmth, a steady, powerful presence wrapped around her consciousness like a heavy, comforting blanket. It felt ancient, protective, and deeply familiar. Ash, her mind supplied, the name just appearing there. The dragon wasn't in the room, but he was with her, a constant, rumbling purr of affection in the back of her mind. And behind that, fainter and much more jarring, was another presence. This one was sharp, analytical, and guarded. It felt like polished steel and cold starlight, a mind locked down with rigid discipline. But a hairline crack had just appeared. Through that crack she felt a current of unwilling connection, a stern, frustrated curiosity aimed right at her. Stellan, the door slid open, and the prince himself walked in. He stood by her bed, his expression unreadable. But she could feel the turmoil behind his golden eyes through their faint new bond. He was a commander whose perfectly ordered world had just been thrown into chaos. "Human," he began, his voice as clipped and cold as ever, but the word didn't have its usual dismissive sting. "Explain what you did." Rose flinched. I didn't do anything, Your Highness. I dropped a stone. It was an accident." Her voice was hoarse. She looked down at her arm. Instead of a mangled wreck, her skin was smooth, except for faint, silvery lines that seemed to shimmer with an inner light. "An accident does not result in this," Stellan stated, gesturing to the empty space between them, acknowledging the psychic link he could no longer deny. "That bond is the sacred right of my bloodline. It is not for you." The unspoken words hung in the air. A lesser species, a servant, an insignificant speck. Before Rose could answer, 3 royal healers entered, their faces grim. They bowed deeply to the prince. "Your Highness," the eldest one said, his voice trembling slightly, "we have consulted the deepest archive scrolls that predate the First Citadel. The readings are undeniable. It is not a simple venomous reaction. It is a triumvirate bond." Stellan's jaw tightened. "That's a myth." "We believed it was, Your Highness," the healer pressed on, daring to meet his gaze. "A legendary 3-way psychic link between a dragon, his rider, and a third party. The texts say it only happens with profound magical compatibility, so rare it hasn't been seen in over 5,000 years. The girl, she didn't just survive. She completed a circuit. The bond has been forged between Ash, the human, and you." The news spread through the palace like wildfire. The human maid who should have died was alive. The human maid was now psychically linked to the heir to the throne. Rose was moved from the medical suite to lavish chambers with guards at her door. They weren't there to keep people out. They were there to keep her in. She was no longer a servant. But she wasn't free. She was a living anomaly, a priceless artifact, and a catastrophic problem all at once. She pushed away the silks and jewels they offered, rejected the gourmet food. All she wanted was the invisibility she had lost. But she was now the most dangerously visible person in the Empire. The whispers soon grew into a roar. The Acheron court, a viper's nest of ambition and tradition, was in an absolute uproar. The nobles, whose power was tied to the purity of the royal bloodlines and their exclusive dragon bonds, saw Rose as a walking blasphemy. "The bond must be one influential lord declared, his face red with indignation. "The human must be executed. It is the only way to cleanse the prince's connection and restore order. She is a contamination." Another agreed. "Her very existence mocks our heritage. What's to stop other, lesser species from trying the same thing? Now that this precedent has been set." Stellan stood silent through it all, his face carved from ice. He felt their fury, their fear, but he also felt the steady, unwavering warmth of Ash's loyalty to the girl, and the faint, terrified pulse of Rose herself, alone in her gilded cage. He was beginning to realize that killing her might feel like tearing out a piece of his own soul. The bond, as unwanted as it was real. Just as the calls for her death hit their peak, the grand doors to the chamber burst open. Princess Nova, Stellan's younger sister, swept in, her face alight not with horror, but with a wild, breathless excitement. She clutched a datapad to her chest, her eyes wide. "They're wrong," she announced, her voice ringing with a clarity that cut through the noise. "Executing her is the last thing we should do." All eyes turned to her. Stellan's expression didn't change, but a question flickered in his mind. Nova ignored the stunned lords and walked right to her brother. "When I heard it was a 3-way bond, I didn't believe it," she said, talking fast. "But it made me remember something I read in the restricted archives, about what happens to dragons when their partners die. The grief. So I searched for any anomalies related to them." She held up the datapad. "It's not a myth, Stellan. And this isn't the first time. It's the 4th. A shocked silence began to fall over the room. Nova's voice dropped, becoming more deliberate, each word a hammer blow against the foundation of their entire society. 3 other times in the last 70 years, a dragon whose Asharan partner died has formed a new, unexpected bond. In every single case, it wasn't with another Asharan noble. It was with a human." She paused, letting the weight of her words land. "And not just any human," she continued, delivering the final, devastating blow. The archives were specific. In all 3 instances, the bond was formed with a first-generation human immigrant, someone born outside the Empire, who came here to work. Not one of them was a human born and raised in our system of servitude. The silence that followed was absolute. It was a silence so profound, so heavy with meaning, that it felt louder than all the shouting that came before it. The demands for execution died on the nobles' lips. Their faces, once twisted with outrage, were now slack with disbelief and a dawning, world-shattering horror. The implication wasn't just a shockwave, It was the complete demolition of their reality. This wasn't a fluke. It was a pattern. The bond wasn't a contamination. It was a compatibility of their own people, raised to believe in their own superiority, apparently lacked. Humans weren't the lesser species. They weren't disposable. They had some kind of latent psychic resilience, an adaptability that allowed them to connect with a grieving dragon in a way the Acheron themselves could not. They were, in the most sacred and fundamental way, a potential solution. A cure. Master Greaves, standing near the back, looked like he'd been turned to stone. The entire basis of his authority, of the rigid order he enforced with an iron fist, had just been obliterated. The humans he saw as little more than animals possessed a power that rivaled the royal family itself. Prince Stellan stood motionless, his sister's words echoing in the vast, silent space. He looked past the stunned faces of his court, his gaze turning inward. The faint telepathic link to Rose suddenly buzzed with the full force of his own shock. He saw her now, not as the clumsy maid, but as the epicenter of a change that would redefine everything. He felt her fear, but underneath it, he also felt a spark of that unyielding spirit, the same spirit that let her survive the bite, the same spirit that had unknowingly answered a dragon's call. The silence held, stretching on. The question of what happened next was no longer about one human girl's survival. It was about the future of an empire that had just been told its most sacred beliefs were a lie, and its most despised servants held the key to its survival. In the quiet of the palace, a new order was about to be born, not in fire and fury, but in the profound, deafening silence of a truth that could no longer be ignored. If you enjoyed this story, hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into sci-fi romance. We want to hear from you in the comments. What do you think Prince Stellan is going to do now that he knows the truth about humanity? The story of Rose, Prince Stellan, and Ash is far from over. A bond has been forged, not just of magic, but of destiny. An empire built on rigid certainty now faces a future of profound questions, where the lines between servant and sovereign have been irrevocably blurred. The silence in the palace is just the breath before a new chapter begins, one that will be written by a girl who was never meant to be seen, and a prince who must now see his entire world with new eyes. Thanks for listening.